Hey, what's up guys? Today we're going to be building a serverless API using Azure Functions on the Microsoft Azure platform. So basically, Azure Functions is a serverless compute service known as a function as a service. It's provided by Azure, which is Microsoft's cloud service, and it basically lets us run event-triggered code without really having to manage any of the infrastructure as much as you normally would anyways. This takes out a lot of the hassle of maintaining servers and all sorts of other stuff that comes with managing infrastructure. So when it comes to why you might want to use Azure Functions, there's a couple of reasons. For one, it's cost effective. You only pay for the resources you use, or basically every execution of the function. So you're not paying, in contrast to a server where you're paying for its uptime, you're paying for the whole time it's up and running. For a function, you basically just pay for the time it takes to execute, and that's it. So it's very cost effective in that sense, and you also just get to focus on the app logic really. So you don't, like I said before, you don't have to deal with the infrastructure, so you can just sort of go straight into building your business logic. Okay, so just a quick glance at what we're going to be actually sort of using today on Azure. So just before we jump in, a prerequisite obviously for this video is that you have a Microsoft Azure account with an active subscription. I'm pretty sure you can just, if you're new to the platform, you can sign up and you get like a free plan, which should cover everything that we're doing here today, so you won't have to pay anything. So basically the resources that we're going to be using on the Azure platform will be Azure App Service, which will contain our Azure Functions, and our Azure Functions are going to need a backend or a database to speak to, and in today's case we're going to be using the Azure Cosmos DB. We're actually going to be using the MongoDB API for this as well. So if you're familiar with MongoDB, a lot of the syntax in the JavaScript that we're going to be using today should look fairly familiar. Alright, sweet guys, so with that out of the way, let's go ahead and actually jump onto the Microsoft Azure portal that you have and just go to the dashboard. So the first thing that we're going to do is actually just create a resource group for everything to be sort of contained in for this video. So just go resource groups and then go to top left, create, and use your current subscription that you have or whatever subscription you want to use. And I'm going to call this Azure My Serverless API, and then just select whatever region is closest to you really. I'm going to select Australia East, and we don't really need to do anything else. We can just create that, and that's okay. So once that's done, just go to your resource group, and from here we're going to actually create a resource. So the first one that we're going to do will be the database. So we're going to go down to Azure Cosmos DB, or you can just type it in, or to the very left here, there's databases. So we go Azure Cosmos DB, and here we get to pick kind of what API we want to use for our Cosmos DB. So today we're using the MongoDB API. Again, it asks you what subscription you want to link this to. So the account name you put here will be for your database. So I'm just going to call this my Azure DB1. And again, just pick your region. And we're actually leaving this here, the capacity mode, on provision throughput. And then we go next. I think we can leave everything else here the same. We're going to leave this as all networks for now, so we're not really covering securing and firewall rules and stuff like that today. So we just go review and create, and then we create it, and that is it. Sweet. So while this deploys, we're going to go ahead and go back to our dashboard and create a new resource. Just make sure that we're in our resource group. Create a new resource, and this is going to be an app service. Actually, I think we can maybe just go straight to functions. I think it's probably easier. So we'll create a function app. Select the resource group that you created. Give your function app a name. I'll just call this my Azure-app1. And the runtime that we're using today will be Node.js. and we'll just leave the rest as it is, and then switching again your region to be specific to you. I think we can leave all the hosting and stuff the same. This storage account here, you might not have one if you just set it up. Otherwise, just create a new one and just go with that. And just make sure as well, I don't think you can change this. I know you can. So the consumption type or the plan type will be consumption, so serverless. And then we can review and create. And that looks all good. So I'm just going to create that now. And that's going to deploy as well. So if your Azure Cosmo DB hasn't already finished deploying, I think mine has. I'll just go to that now. So go back to your resource group. And then just here, you can see my Azure-DB1. So I'll click on that. And basically all we need for now is just our connection string. So if you go to, on the left here, it says connection string. Just copy this here. And I'm just going to save this away onto my notepad here on the side. So just save that connection string because we're going to need it in a second once our Azure Function app has finished deploying. Alright guys, so once your Function app has finished deploying, go back to your dashboard and then just click at the top here if it's here for you, it's Function app, and then select the one that we just deployed. And now we need to actually create the functions within this Function app. So go to Functions and then up here just click Create. And we want a HTTP triggered function because we're going to be doing, get requests, post requests, put requests, and delete requests like that. So we want HTTP triggers, and I'm going to call this. I'll call this one init actually. So init DB. So this one here I'm just doing as one just to initialize our database with some records and collections basically. So we'll create that one, and then we're going to create a few more here as well. So let's go back to the Function app. Oops. Functions, create HTTP trigger, get dash list. Alright guys, so just repeat that process, I think it's 5 times. So you've got a get-item function, a get-list, an init-db, a remove-item, and an update-item. And I do apologize, I've just realized as I was recording that the webcam I think was in the way of the name and the authorization level, so I'm just putting a picture up here. And they're going to be all the same, so the HTTP trigger and the authorization is all the same throughout all these functions. They're just different names as well. So cool. Alright, so once we've got all our functions there, it's time to actually jump in and do some logic with these functions, actually build them up. So we want to go down to the app service editor. We'll crank this up. Okay, so once you've opened up the editor, you can see on the left here we've got our functions that we just created in the portal before. If you click on these and go to the index, you can see they're filled out with the default sort of code that comes as you create those functions through the portal. So before we actually touch the code itself, we need to install a couple dependencies first for our functions. And the only 2 dependencies we need really is just UUID. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. That just creates unique records dynamically for us. We don't have to worry about creating unique IDs every time. And then also MongoDB, because we're using the MongoDB API. So if you open up to the left here on the console, and then we type in npm install UUID and then MongoDB, I think that should be okay. Alright, so once you get here and your npm packages are finished downloading, we can go back to our function. We'll go to our init-db function first actually. And so expand that, go to the index.js, and now we're actually just going to get rid of some of this boilerplate code that we don't need. So really all we need is just this here. We'll leave that for now. So just that is okay. And just quickly as well, so if you're not familiar with Azure Functions already, the context objects that you see here is the object that Azure Functions uses to pass data between the function and the runtime. So you can't actually do like a console.log here. You'd have to do a context.log to see the result back here in the terminal. So if I come bring that back in, take that out, oops, you see here that the boilerplate code had this context.log. So that's how we can see a sort of console log in Azure Functions. Okay guys, so first things first, what we're going to want to do is just bring in our MongoDB and UUID npm packages. So we'll just say const mongo client equals require MongoDB, and then const, and we'll say v4 UUID v4 equals require UUID. Alright, so now we'll also define a variable for our connection string, or the URL for our connection string. So we'll just say const URL, and then we just paste in the connection string that we got earlier, and then we can just create a Mongo client using the connection string and MongoDB. So we'll say const client equals new Mongo client, passing in that URL. Sweet. Alright, so now what we really need to do is just connect to our database, or connect to our Cosmo DB instance, sorry. And then we're going to create a database, and then within that database we'll create a collection, and we'll just dump in some sort of dummy data basically. So first we'll have to connect to it, so we'll say await client.connect const database. So we'll create a new database in our Cosmo DB instance. So this will be client.db, and we'll just call this database town. And then I think within that we'll have a collection called like people or something. So const collection equals database.collection, and we'll call this people. And now we'll have to insert a collection of people. And I'm gonna build a little array here to pass into this collection in a second. But first, I just want to define sort of the logic as to connecting and creating the connect collection and the database itself. So we'll say await collection dot delete many. So we'll clear out the collection first, and then await collection dot insert many, and I'll say my people, and that should be all we really need, I think, for actually connecting to it, connecting to our Cosmo DB, creating a database called town, creating a collection within the database called town called people, and then inserting a object into this collection called my people. So now we just have to create that object. So I'll say let my people equal an array, and this array will have a bunch of objects, and the first thing we want is an ID, and to get an ID we're going to actually use that UUID v4. So we'll say UUID v4, just like that, and a name for people. So I'll just say oops, Daniel, and we'll say occupation, and I'll say Azure tutorials, and we'll give it one more, I'll say hobby, I'll say sports, and I'm just going to copy this a couple times so we have a few, maybe one more. And we'll say John, his occupation is a chiropractor. Alright, so just to sum it up, what we're doing here is we're defining up here our connection string, creating a new Mongo client, passing in that connection string, which is connecting to our instance. So then we connect to our instance down here, and then we create a new database called town on our Cosmo DB instance, and then within the town database we're going to create a new collection called people, And that collection called people is going to have all these items or records within that collection that we've defined up here in our array of called my people. So now all I need to do really is just, we've got no response message variable, so I'm just going to create one. So I'll just say update or init is done, just like that. Okay, so we've defined all the logic that we need for the actual function itself. There is one more thing we have to do, which is actually in the function.json for this init-db function. So if we go here, then here we can actually define some of the config for what's known as bindings for this function. So most of it I'm going to leave the same. What I do want to change is the methods on it, so the methods that can be used on this function. I just want to do get for this one, so I'll get rid of the post method. And then secondly, we're going to actually add a new binding for the route. And the route is basically what defines our endpoint for this function pretty much. So by default, the route or the endpoint used will have the function name or the default function name within the endpoint. But by doing it this way, we can actually define our own routes and our own endpoints and also pass in parameters this way. Which I'll show shortly. So for this one, I will just say create new DB as the route, and then just put a comma there, and I think that looks pretty good. Okay, so now going back to our Azure App Service where we got all our functions, we can go ahead and try to test this now. So I'm going to go into this init-db function. We'll go code plus test. And here we can see the function logic that we just created, looking okay there. And if you go to get function URL, I'll just copy this. You can see here that our endpoint or our route that we defined, this create new DB, is actually part of this endpoint here. So that's where it is there. Alright, so I'm just going to scrap this here and actually going to use the built-in testing and running that we can do within Azure itself. So I'll just use get, and there's no parameters, so I'm going to actually get rid of this body as well, and then we can just run it. Cool. So once that comes back, you should see something like we have here. So it's all successful, it says 200 OK response, and we also got back our context body, which was init is done. Alright, so last thing we need to do now is go back to our Azure Cosmo DB and just check it out. So we just confirm that, you know, all of our objects or our people have basically been inserted into our database. So I've just come to my Cosmo DB instance and gone to Data Explorer. And once I'm here, I should see a new database called Town. And within that database, here we go, we've got a collection called People. And now we have documents in here, which should correspond to the ones that we inserted. So here we go. I'll just open this up. There we go. We've got Daniel, Azure Sports, Azure Tutorials, and Hobby of Sports. Cool. Alright, so I'm just going to go back to our app service editor. Now I'm just going to go ahead and set up the other functions. I am going to breeze through this part now. I'm just going to dump them all in and just sort of skip ahead of the video because I don't want this video to sort of blow out of me just typing away. So, alright, so I've just updated all the functions and I'll give you a quick run through of what we have. So I've got an update item function, which currently looks like this. And the function.json for this one is different because we actually need to pass in an ID, and that is done as a parameter with the route. So that is how you can set it up there. And you would just pass this in as a query parameter in your HTTP request. So when you go, if you try testing it out here, you can just add a parameter and that would be called ID, and the ID you would have to use whatever UUID was provided to actually update that specific document. And now we've got a remove item function that looks like that. and the function.json is basically similar, but the method has a delete on it as well. Now, Azure Functions doesn't currently support, at least that as far as I'm aware of, deleting and putting as well. Obviously, you can use Postman to test that out, but I've only seen get and post on the Azure portal's testing ability, so just something to be aware of there. The init-db we've already done together, and the get-list just gets the whole collection, and then the get-item, which will just retrieve a single item. It looks like that as well, and the function.json for that is very similar to the other ones. Now, I will post a link to a GitHub which will have all this code in there, so if you want to just copy and paste it, go ahead. But yeah, I just wanted to skip ahead because this video could blow out to another 10-15 minutes of you just watching me type, so I figured you can just pause the video and look at it as you need to. So okay guys, so I think I'm going to wrap the video up there. I hope you've learned something today, and hopefully you can see now just how kind of simple it is really to set up a serverless backend on Azure Functions and perform some simple CRUD routines. As I said previously, I will post a link in the description where you can find the GitHub, which will contain all the function code. Otherwise guys, if you found this video useful, as usual, comment, like, share and subscribe for future content just like this one. And I'll see you in the next video. Thanks guys.